Chapter 3 of Part 5 of The Lord by Guardini brings us, this is Part 5 is the last days. Chapter 3 is God's humility. And in this chapter, we're going to again see how the Lord manifests His character in the midst of reality. And it's a very important chapter because it kind of opens the way for the rest of the journey. Looking at God's humility as a qualifier of love. And it's a chapter that has surprisingly deep insight. It starts with this question, okay? This is what Guardini says. Sometime or other, the disquieting thought occurs to anyone who seriously endeavors to know Jesus' life. Is such a thing possible? The question does not arise facilely. For almost 2,000 years, the image of the Lord has moved men's minds and sentiments, accepting Jesus' incredible existence as the well-known and self-understood canon of right living. They've forgotten wonder. So here's the first point that's worth pondering. Like that Christmas song, I wonder as I wander. In other words, one has to have a capacity for wonder, a capacity for awe, a capacity to stand back from the narrative and consider it whole. And what happens often, as Guardini's pointing out here, is people start to accept things about Christ and Christianity just because it's a canon of right living, and they forgot how to stand back and wonder. Okay? It's that capacity to wonder. It's important in the Platonic dialogues. It's important to education. And Joseph Pieper points out that wonder is a component of hope. Because if you have everything kind of in perfect possession, you don't wonder. But life isn't about perfect possession. It's about a pilgrim way, a way through darkness and difficulty, and a way through, at times, what Thomas Merton calls the unspeakable. That is, that encounter with just these public proclamations, in the words of Merton, I'm paraphrasing him, that from the moment they're made, they're filled with a fallacious kind of non-being, and they become, to Merton, the unspeakable. And Merton thinks that it's important to maintain hope, even in the face of these proclamations that are illegitimate from the very moment that they're made in public situations. It's obviously confronting the unspeakable with hope has to have a condition of wonder in it too. But here Guardini is saying that as we look at the Lord, we can't forget wonder. And people have forgotten wonder. However, he says, once one begins to probe beneath the surface of that existence, a question is bound to tap on the pain of consciousness. What is the real nature of Jesus? And what that of human life as determined by him? Okay? That's what he's going to try to answer. And he says that what's gotten in the way, he says, a centuries-old struggle against the supremacy of Christ has so undermined his prestige in the eyes of many that today the mere question is often tantamount to refusal. In other words, people toss Jesus aside and they toss their Christian identity aside because over the centuries there's been a struggle against his lordship, his supremacy in the culture. Okay? Millions, he says, reject the conception of man drawn by Christ. So he's already accepting the fact that millions reject Jesus' conception of man. All the more clearly then must the believer be capable of recognizing the essence of that Christianity against which opposition turns with deepening and ever increasing violence. So he's recognizing that the world is getting more and more opposed to an authentic reading of the person based on Christianity. People are actually doing violence to it. Okay? And not only in the hearts and minds of the others, he says, but also in ourselves. So this is a winner-take-all fight that's being waged with a kind of metaphysical and, unfortunately, sometimes and in some places, physical violence against Christ and against the image of Christ in humanity. Here's what he says. Only when we accept Christ and his radically new conception of man, not merely by act of will or for reasons of blind loyalty. So, yeah, I mean, so Guardini gives two cases of a kind of incomplete way of adhering to Christianity. The first one is by an act of will. And I see this in Frank Sheed's book about theology and sanity. He says a lot of good Christians just are Christians by way of their will, but they don't feed their intellect on the truths of Christianity and the truth of Christ. And I hope I got the proper book, but he wrote a number of books that circle around the problem of theology and sanity is one. What difference does Jesus make is another. To know Christ Jesus is another. In those, he's making the same point here that Guardini does, that you got to feed the intellect, and Guardini would add, with the virtue of wonder, on top of just willing to be Christian. Okay, that's one. And then the other is reasons of blind loyalty. So people are sort of by party loyal to their Christian faith, but they don't have vital conviction about it. Now, I've seen that pastorally a lot, where they're loyal to the church and they come to church and all that, but they've lost that vital conviction, or they haven't cultivated it. They're still faithful to their baptism, and that's good. I'm certainly not decrying that. But there is a kind of a sense of carried on blind loyalty that isn't enough. We have to be Christians, says Guardini, by vital conviction. And the only way to feed conviction is by feeding our hearts and minds together, in our adherence together with the virtue of wonder. And so that really sets up the beginning of the answer to the title of the chapter, which is God's humility. So in order to get to the answer on God's humility, the first thing I need is a vital connection to the Lord. And then we go from there. So he's going to contrast this now with the understanding of the ancients, antiquity. Now in the previous chapter, he mentioned antiquity in reference to Socrates. So here we are. He says, to understand antiquity's idea of man, we must examine its gods and heroes, myths and legends. In these, we find the classical prototype of genuine man. Okay, now he's going to paint this picture of genuine antiquities man. Okay? Assuredly, he says, side by side with the proud and the noble, we find the most repulsive crime, downfall, and annihilation. Nevertheless, all characters and events have one trait in common, he says, the will to greatness. Okay? Wealth, power, and fame. Okay? This, he says, is the measure applied to all things. Wealth, power, and fame. Even, he says, to sacrilege and death. Anything opposed to it falls short of the authentically human, to the ancient, to the antiquity mind. It comes under the rubric second-class humanity. I mean, like the Fleetwood Mac song, second-hand news. There's second-class humanity. I'm just second-hand news, says the song by Fleetwood Mac. It's the same thing. Small fry, burdened with the problems of ordinary life. Ultimately, second-class humanity for Guardini equals slaves. And he says, these are necessarily there, but they have no share in genuine humanity, according to antiquity. Okay? What a world of difference between this conception, Guardini says, and that to which Christ has led us. So now get ready, because Jesus is going to challenge antiquity here. And this is important. He's going to challenge antiquity's notion of man, of what a person is. Here, and this is what he says. Here, he says, grandeur of existence, human splendor, are no longer measuring rod. Much in the life of Christ is totally outside the pale of accepted antique values. Okay, got it? Totally outside the pale. Get ready for that, because that's what we got to confront. He's going to come to us from the peripheries of humanity, as Pope Francis reminds us. Okay, it's the same idea. It's a similar idea. It's the same idea to me. That when you want to really understand things, go to the peripheries, and then work from the peripheries back to the center. That's Pope Francis's account, and I think it's affected here by Guardini myself, if I could be so bold. I mean, remember that Pope Francis did a doctoral dissertation on Guardini and had to stop it when he became a bishop, and he turned it over to someone else. So he's very interested in Guardini. Well, I would say perhaps somebody could do a doctorate on that. Like, the question being, how does Pope Francis's notion of the peripheries relate to Guardini's point here about the conception of antiquity and the conception of Christ? Okay? So Guardini goes on. The race from which Jesus springs is one of vanished glory, but he does not dream of reviving it. Okay? With him, it's no question of the will to power or fame as a philosopher or the poet's glory. Jesus is poor. There you go. Not as Socrates is poor, with a philosophical flavor to his poverty, but literally poor. Not poor as one who has been struck down by fate, or as a great ascetic through whose poverty a painful or mysterious greatness blazes. In other words, a person who accepts poverty for the sake of doing heroic ascetic fasting and that kind of thing. Some of the Stoic ascetics were like that, right? Or and the Christians in the age of the early desert fathers picked up on that, like these desert fathers that sat on poles, and all that, and pulled off amazing feats of asceticism. No, Christ wasn't poor like that. His poverty was poor simply in the sense of absence of needs, which incidentally are provided for. Jesus' friends are in no way remarkable for their talent or character. He who considers the apostles or disciples great from a human or religious point of view raises the suspicion that he is unacquainted with true greatness. Okay? True greatness according to antiquity. That's what he's saying. Moreover, he is confusing standards, for the apostle and disciple have nothing to do with such greatness. This is, the confusion of like a purely ancient, antique, as Guardini puts it, human conception of greatness versus what greatness is to being an apostle or disciple of the Lord. They have nothing to do with each other, according to Guardini. For the apostle and the disciple have nothing to do with such greatness. Their uniqueness comes of their being sent. Okay? They have to be sent by the Lord. And by the Lord's, I'd add this, by the Lord's community to whatever field they're going to. And their uniqueness consists of their being sent, of their God-given role of pillars of the coming salvation. Okay? So they're there as messengers of God's salutary will, as we've seen. That's another term Guardini uses. But they're messengers of that coming salvation. As for Jesus' own destiny, how disturbingly terrible it is, says Guardini. He teaches, but his teachings take root nowhere, not even among his own followers, for they don't understand. He struggles, but it's no genuine struggle, for the opposing forces never really clash. All he does and all that is done to him bears the stamp of mysterious failure. Okay, that's all it is. Mysterious failure. That's all we're left with, according to Guardini. He goes on. He does not end in grandiose enterprise, but in court. That, wow. Think about that. I especially recommend you think about that if you've had some failures in your life that ended up either close to or in court. Then you kind of, at that point, you have the opportunity to feel what Jesus must have felt on a human level. That's how I'd put it. That's what it's about. He's a failure. He ends up in court. Wow. His friends do nothing. The impression Peter's conduct in Gethsemane, where, remember, he fell asleep, and in the courtyard of the high priest, must make any homme d'honneur is a macon. In other words, an honorable man of nobility looking at this, a man of honor, would be, say, that's a pitiful response that he made. He falls asleep when he's been called to stand with his friend and pray. That's one. And the second one, he denies him before the cock crows 3 times. And then he just sort of flails about, right? Remember? It's like, that's pretty pitiful to what a man of real honor would do, according to the ancient view. See? That's what Guardini's contrasting. It's worth thinking about, maybe even in a meditation of place. From the natural standpoint, says Guardini, Jesus' passion and death are only tortuous and unbearable. We understand and shudderingly sympathize with the death of a great philosopher, for example, who dies for his ideas. Now, we could think of Socrates. Or that of the hero who goes down in battle. Okay? Right? Or of Caesar, even of Caesar, who in the very act of mounting to the epitome of power falls under the daggers of conspirators. So notice conspiracy, conspirators. We might want to study what was the conspiracy that took down Caesar. Unless, of course, we get accused of being conspiracy theorists if we do so. But how can one see without revolt the proclaimer of divine wisdom, that is Jesus, being spat upon, or watch the soldiers play their gruesome pranks, or witness a death intended to annihilate not only the body of the Lord, but also his honor and the mission from which he came? Okay, so everything is a failure. The honor, the mission, even the body is defiled by the crucifixion. Right? But, he says, Guardini says, the scandal, with the quotes, neither begins nor ends there. Thank God. Before this, there had been the blood of the new covenant. Okay, the Eucharist, right? Remember, Guardini is doing this as an extended reflection on the way God reveals himself to Romano Guardini in the liturgy. So here he is, reflecting on the liturgy. Before this, there had been the blood of the new covenant, that mystery which, as Jesus prophesied in Capharnaum, would be intolerable to those who heard it. So, golly, you got the crucifixion, that's an intolerable situation. You got the failure of Jesus before that in court with his disciples, and now another intolerable mystery. You see what Guardini's lining up? And afterwards, the tremendous event of the resurrection, which modern science dismisses as fantastic or pathological. Take your pick. Which is it? Of course, it's neither. But to Guardini, he's pointing out something here. Okay? He's eliciting the gift of faith. That's what I see here. He says, nevertheless, this Eucharist is the central mystery of Christian life. Sure is. The sum and substance, the source and summit of the Christian life. Whenever we eat this bread and drink this cup, we proclaim your death, O Lord, till you come again. This is my body given for you. This is my blood, new covenant, shed for you, for all, and for the many. Sins may be forgiven. Wow, there it is. The central mystery. This death, the death on the cross, has become the fountainhead of salutary existence. Look to the cross. One cross saves all. This resurrection has been the all-transforming power now for almost 2,000 years. More than 2,000 years now, or almost more. How strange it all is, Guardini says. If we ask antiquity, what is the true nature of man and how may it be realized? The answer is, by a life of grandeur. Right? And what does Christianity reply to the same question? And then he puts something that really hits you in the face. He puts it in parentheses. There is, of course, no such thing as the Christian answer. Into parentheses. Then you ask yourself, well, why are you asking it, Romano? I mean, at least that's the way I approach that. He says, and what does Christianity reply to this same question? There is, of course, no such thing as the Christian answer. Then why are you asking it? Well, because, once again, we're dealing with mystery. We're dealing with uncertainty. We're dealing with an area that can't be fully described, but you still need to sketch it out. And that's what Guardini's doing. Okay, let's see what he says in his sketch. Anything is possible, says Guardini. So, start with the fundamental thing that for God, nothing is impossible. And remember, when he said that, he was talking about the salvation of the rich, right? For man, it's impossible. But for God, anything is possible. So, even grand people can be saved, okay? Really. I mean, there's a kind of concept of Christianity that only the poor can be saved. The rich have no hope, according to that view. It's a kind of quasi-Marxist view, if I might put it so in that way, that they tend to see all virtue dwelling in the poor. Well, Guardini is going to point out that's not the full Christian answer. Okay? So what is, Romano? That's the problem. Here's how he answers it. Nothing necessarily precludes neither the most exalted existence nor the most shameful. Okay? Everything is summoned. The entire plumbless, unpredictable scale of human possibilities. We're all called. Now, not all of us respond, or not all of us respond with the same zeal, but we're all called. Everything, he says, the noblest and the basest, receives from Christ new significance. So Christ lights up the significance of every person. That's really important. That's so important. And it's been forgotten. Everybody wants to tribalize or weaponize Christian truth. You're not Christian. I'm Christian because I follow this or I follow that. No. One cross saves all. That's the point. And so everything is open to the possibility of Christ beginning a new beginning in that person. Even the most wicked. That's kind of amazing. God could save that wicked person that's doing those wicked things. And you dare not get in the way of God's salvation of that person. That's sort of what Guardini is saying, I think. And then from there, he continues. For in everything lies the seed of new beginning. How great the transformation of our conception of man through Christianity is something we are again beginning to appreciate now that its validity is no longer generally accepted. precisely in being rejected, Christianity can come roaring back. That's what Gordini is saying. Because it's not generally accepted, we can begin to appreciate now that there's a transformation available. Perhaps, he says, the moment is not distant in which the Christian ideal, like that of antiquity during the Renaissance. Remember, during the Renaissance, the ideal of antiquity was repeated, right? But this time he's hoping for a time that the Christian ideal is going to be repeated. Oh, I hope so. It may cost us a lot, but boy, would that be worth it, to have the Christian ideal come back, okay? And he hopes that it will overwhelm the modern consciousness with its unspeakable plenitude, okay? So instead of unspeakable lies and unspeakable conundrums that create human hopelessness in the eyes of Merton, we have Gordini suggesting that Christianity can pour forth in our world with unspeakable plenitude. Please God. Not only our idea of man has been modified by Christ, also our idea of God. Now, right? The believer perceives who God is. To the question about the Father, Christ answers, "He who has seen me sees also the Father." St. Paul identifies him as the God and Father of the Lord Jesus. But what is he like, this God? How does he compare with the supreme being of the philosophers? Okay? With the universal life of Hinduism, with the wisdom of all happening described in Taoism. Remember Jordan Peterson? He deals with that one a lot, the Tao. With the human, superhuman abundance of Greek gods and their intense vitality and Olympian superiority. Of course, the Greek gods are superior. At least they are to the Greeks, right? Even the Christian's conception of God is anything but self-understood, says Gordini. 2,000 years of intellectual and spiritual development have familiarized us with the God and Father of the Lord Jesus as the image of divine being. For some time, however, Western culture has begun to desert this conception of the supreme power, and it is now evident why it has to be historically revealed. Notice, he says, historically revealed. It has to be revealed in time and place by a revelation. That's a pretty compelling concern here. What is he like, the God of Jesus Christ? Since he revealed himself in the person and destiny of Jesus, he must be like Jesus. What divine reality then is ours through our knowledge of the New Testament? Notice he lines up these questions. So he goes back to Socrates. From Socrates' figure radiates the sublimity of philosophical summits. From the Greek pantheon, there we are, the Greek gods again, they're elite gods, the Olympians. The divinity of luminous heights or terrestrial depths. From the ranks of Hindu divinities, the universal one and all, in capitals, behind all things, small print. What message is there for us in the life of Jesus? So, line up these others and say, well, what does Jesus have to say about it? And he asks another question. What kind of father becomes a parent in the Son who is so lamentably unsuccessful. In other words, one of the things that people do is they judge a father by the success or lack of success of his sons. And we already saw that Jesus didn't line up with antiquity's sense of success. So what are we supposed to do with the image of the Father? That's what Guardini's asking there, right? Look, the Son is arrested and liquidated as a dangerous enthusiast. An upstart? We forget in the Incarnation, God did not merely fill a human being with his light or carry him away in a surge of divine enthusiasm. He himself came in person. So there's just this revelation of this Father with this Son who's a failure, right? What Christ did, God did. What Christ suffered, God suffered. The Father rejected no part of the life of his Son. No part. Even the failure he accepted. The I behind the teachings and experiences of Jesus' life stand for God and reveals him. Hence its inestimable importance to us. Moreover, the brief life of God on earth is no episode ending with Jesus' death. The band that connects him with humanity continues through the resurrection and ascension into all time. Resurrection, ascension, and Pentecost into all time. Never again is God to brush off the handful of finite being that was Jesus of Nazareth, even though he was, at the time, an apparent failure. Think about that. Henceforth, and to all eternity, God remains the God who became man even in failure. That's what Guardini's getting at. This alone is so unheard of that something within us very nearly revolts. It sure does. Nobody likes a failure, a loser. Nobody. I mean, not in our society. You got to be a winner somehow. Okay? So those of us who try to follow Jesus through that have quite a task. How can such behavior, he says, in quotation marks, be reconciled with genuine Godhead? And then it goes on. Your thinking is false, says Christianity. You expect your human conception of man to answer to your conception of divinity, which in turn you try to reconcile with the personality and fate of Jesus. Thus, you make yourself judge of what is essentially a matter of existence and point of departure outside human experience. So the first thing you got to do is enter into the realm of faith, which is a gift outside of regular human experience. You must reverse your whole approach to God, he says, and ask, with Jesus as he is, and his life as it was, how must the God he revealed be the God and Father of Jesus Christ? And the question must be constantly renewed. You can see that in the way Guardini's posing it. You got to keep renewing the question in the face of the constant failure you experience, I think. That our faith, he says, and love remain intensely conscious of the God who summoned us even in the midst of failure. See, that's what's going on. Its answer confronts us on every page of Holy Scripture. He must be one who loves. That's the answer. Love does such things. Remember that principle? Early on in Guardini, we saw it before. You're confronted with the mystery of God. Love does such things. It passes up the standards of usage and so-called reason. It begins anew and creates. We learn further that God is more than the loving one, more than the perfect fulfillment of all existing love. He is love itself. Got it? Turned about, the logical consequences of our thought now recognize the truth that what we call love is only the reflection, often distorted, of an attitude of power whose real name is God. When such a God enters human history, must he not necessarily shatter all traditional forms of existence? Mustn't his presence in an alien world seem strangely disquieting? You bet. It is. It's strangely disquieting. Let him disquiet you. He's going to reveal himself. He says, Guardini continues, that presence which is pulled down to the nadir of paltriness only to rise again sky high in a superabundance of glory surpassing anything ever known? That is correct. But in order to grasp all that, the word love means here, we must, he says, examine another facet of it that has yet escaped our attention. Wait a second. I thought we could just say God is love. But this comes under the heading, love is not all you need. You need another qualifier, says Guardini here. Since God is love, is there anything love cannot do? Why doesn't he simply pour his light into men's spirit? Why doesn't his truth break in on it? Truth that is simultaneously glory and irresistible costliness that consumes men with desire for him. That would also be love. Why then an existence like that of Jesus? Why doesn't he just come down and show us? Remember? That's a real heartfelt objection here. We answer because of sin, right? That's the first answer. But can sin hinder the all-powerful will of love? Can't God fill men with such horror of sin that they fly to him in contrition and love? Who is to say what is possible and what not? No, there must be something else in God that the word love does not cover. It seems that we must say, God is humble. But first you got to clarify the word humble. We use it to describe someone who bows to the grandeur of another, right? Or who esteems a talent that surpasses his own, or approaches without envy another's merit. That's not humility, that's honesty, according to Guardini. Difficult as may sometimes be, such an attitude is more or less than simple intellectual integrity. And God, we need a lot of that too, right? We need intellectual integrity, but that's not humility. Humility, however, does not move upwards but downwards. It does not mean that the loser, the lesser one, respectfully acknowledges the greater, but that the greater reverently bends to the lesser one, to the loser. By this profound mystery, we can measure how far removed the Christian attitude is from any natural earthiness. That the great one kindly descends to the little one, gently respecting his importance. That he descends to the little one, gently respecting his importance. That he is touched by weakness and makes himself its defender. Well, that much we get. We comprehend that, he says. But humility begins only where greatness reverently bows before one who is not great. You got to include that interior reverence to the little one. Not just protecting the little one, which is good. We understand that one. But you got to reverently bow down before that little one. Doesn't the great one degrade himself by such stooping? Notice the word stooping. John Donne told the story of the rabbi. They asked the rabbi, why is it that nobody can see God? And the rabbi answered, because nobody can stoop so low. This is precisely what a person does not do. Walking in humility, he is mysteriously self-confident and knows the more daringly he flings himself away into that stooping, the more certainly he will find himself. Will his gesture be rewarded? Definitely. In his humble encounter with the little man, He learns to appreciate his intrinsic value. Not that he to whom he descends also has his worth, but that his very unimportance possesses a special costliness of its own. To the humble one, this is a great revelation. When St. Francis knelt at the throne of the Pope, says Guardini, it was not an act of humility, since he believed in the papal dignity, but only of verity. He was only telling the truth. He was humble when he bowed to the poor, or when he kissed the leper. Not as one who condescends to help them, or whose humanitarian instinct sees in every beggar a remnant of human dignity, but as one whose heart has been instructed by God, flings himself to the ground before the mystery of paltriness, as before that of majesty. He who does not see this must find Francis of Assisi kind of crazy, exalte. Actually, he was only responding in himself to the secret of Jesus. When the Lord praises God, because thou didst hide these things from the wise and prudent, and did reveal them to little ones, this does not only mean that he is holding up to men the incredibleness of the new divinity by destroying the existing standards, but that human non-entity itself is filled with grandeur and is precious to him. This is the attitude God brought with him to earth. Learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. Before the Last Supper, he knelt before his disciples and washed their feet, not to debase himself, but to reveal to them the divine mystery of humility. There is no other possibility. God himself must be humble. In him, the eternal, omnipotent, all-glorious one, must lie a readiness to prostrate himself before the infinite scrap of existence that we are in his eyes. We're just an infinite scrap of existence. Something in him must make him willing to assume the existence of an unknown human being from the village of Nazareth. Is such a thing possible? Desirable? Isn't it unseemly folly? God himself replies, no, it's not folly. Already in the Old Testament he has said, it's my delight to dwell among the children of men. In all reverence, it must be mysteriously blissful. Ultimate happiness for God, right? Blissful for him to refine himself in the flesh and blood heart of the Nazarene. So consider God's joy in taking flesh. Here is the bliss, the sense of which outstrips all measure. That's where the joy comes from. This assuming the responsibility for experiencing the fate of such an abandoned and questioned human life. It gives us all hope. The cross is our hope. Got it? St. Paul touches on the same mystery when he says of Jesus, who though he was by nature God, Philippians 2, did not consider being equal to God a thing to be clung to, but emptied himself, and taking the nature of a slave and being made like unto men. Therefore God has also exalted him and has bestowed upon him the name that is above every other name. Philippians 2, crucial meditative passage. Never forget it. This then, the humility of God, he uses the word again, a stooping toward that which in his eyes hardly exists. Humility possible only because he is everything that exists. Herein lies his ultimate glory. So the ultimate glory of God is his humility. They go together. That's what Guardini's saying. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things before entering into his glory? That's the next quote. That's Luke 24. From here, plumbless humility, he draws the splendor of that new creation. Okay? So if you can't enter into God's humility, you're not going to get to the new creation. That's what Guardini's saying. This, he says, is what had to exist in addition to love. That Christian love might be. You can't be Christian love unless it comes in that humility. Humility being truth, right? That love that sustained Jesus' life, and according to St. John is God himself, is founded on such humility. God then is the humbly loving one. What a reversal of all existing values, says Guardini. Also divine. In truth, this God destroys everything that man in the pride of his revolt constructs of his own inspiration. Here, ultimate temptation lifts its head, the impulse to say, I will not bend the knee to such a God, right? That's what they'll do. They don't want the humble God. They want the exalted God, only the exalted God. To an absolute being, to an all-inclusive glory, to a supreme idea with a capital I, a sublime Olympian with a capital O. Yes, I'll give myself to that kind of God. To a humble God? No. That's what Guardini's saying. Oh my gosh, I can't accept the humble God. This is the human problem, according to Guardini. Christian humility, though, mirrors God's humility. It means above all that man accepts his role, not creator, but creature, subject to time, and a humble God. Man is not a noble being, not a beautiful soul, or an exalted spirit, but sinner, peccator. And as if this were not enough, sinner in the eyes of a humble judge. A judge that's willing to endure the sins, right? A humble judge. Here we have it. Expression of profoundest revolt in the often heard words, God is not to my taste. I can't accept a God like that. Largely because I don't want to be a humble judge myself. I think that's part of it. Humility means the breaking of this satanic taste reaction. Yeah, I got to give that up. I got to stop judging, I guess. That's part of it. And bowing deeply, rather, not only before God's majesty, but even more deeply before his humility, like St. Francis with the leper. Obeisance of all that is deemed great in the world before him, whom the world despised. It means that as a natural human being, conscious of health, beauty, strength, talent, intelligence, and culture, he submits to him who from these familiar standards seems so questionable, right? But I'm a worm and no man, the reproach of men and the outcast of the people, right? Quoted in reference to the cross. This is the foundation and point of departure of Christian humility. Never to be confused with ruse that purposely makes itself less than it is. That's not Christian humility. Still less with an inferiority complex. No, this is what it is. Humility and love are not virtues of degeneracy. They spring from that creative gesture of God, which ignores all that is purely natural and are directed toward the new world in the process of creation. Thus, a man can practice humility only to the extent that he's conscious of the grandeur, both actual and latent, that God has planted in him. God doesn't make junk, people. God's planted grandeur in you, but it's God's grandeur. And that's what he's saying. You can practice humility based on the way, on understanding the proper way that you were and are created. Thank God. Thank you very much. Humility is truth directed toward the new world in the process of creation. To be humble is to be true to the manner and the result of our creation by God. Thank you very much again. Little postscript.